Hi everyone, it's Melissa, and today I am here to talk about the books I read for middle grade March. So the first book I read for middle grade March was from the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankenweiler. It is by E.L. Konigsberg. So this was a fun little read. It's about a brother and sister who run away from home and secretly stay at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And while they are secretly sleeping in the museum, they start to uncover a mystery surrounding a new art piece in the museum that may or may not have been a lost sculpture from Michelangelo. This, I think, was a fun book. I do think it reads better for children than adult. I mean, obviously it's a kid's book, so I mean, let's give it that to begin with. But I think I would have enjoyed this more as a child. The next book I read was The City of Ember by Jean Dupreux. It's about the society that lives in darkness. There's no light. The only light in the City of Ember are the artificial lights. When the lights are out, it's completely pitch black. The story revolves around these 12-year-old kids who are uncovering the truth about their world, and there's kind of like a ticking clock element to the story because the lights of the City of Ember that have been glowing for like hundreds of years, as long as anyone can remember, they're starting to flicker and they're having outages, and the outages are getting more frequent and then longer. So these two kids are trying to figure out, how they can save their city apparently or escape. No one thinks there's anything beyond the City of Ember. They have always been told that the City of Ember is the only light in the world. So yes, it's part mystery, part dystopian. It's adventurous. I just loved this book, and basically as soon as I was finished, I went to my Goodreads and added the sequel to my TBR because I need to read it. The next book I read was Beyond the Bright Sea by Lauren Wolk. I want to say that this was my favorite new book that I read, because I did do a couple of rereads. It is charming and heartwarming, and it made me feel so good on the inside. So it's about a young girl named Crow who was raised on the Elizabeth Islands off the coast of Massachusetts. But essentially, she was found by kind of like a hermit type man who lived on one of the Elizabeths. His name is Osh. But he finds her as a baby. She washes up on shore in a skiff. She's just hours old, it looks like. And the story is about her finding out about her origins. It's a story of found family and what family means, and it's just wonderful. I really felt the author did an absolutely amazing job of using the setting and really making her world feel so rich. I feel like I knew the Elizabeths after this. And that kind of like harsh but beautiful coastal scenery, I think, really lended itself well to the story. And yeah, it was just a gem of a book. The next book I read was Wish Tree by Catherine Applegate. This is narrated by the tree. It's a story about a tree who is a wish tree. So every year people write on little ribbons and scraps and rags their wishes and tie it to the tree. But recently someone has written a nasty word on the tree directed at, it seems like, an immigrant family who lives in the neighborhood. And then there's talks about cutting the tree down, and the animals try to band together, the animals that live and use the tree. And yeah, this book didn't do it for me. I've heard a lot of really good things said about this book. It has a really high rating on Goodreads, like 4.23 something. and I just don't get why. Sorry if you like this book, but I just don't understand why. I had a lot of problems with it. I think I gave this like 2 stars, and I was being a bit generous. I really only gave it 2 stars over 1 because I thought like the message was nice, but I thought the message, like this anti-bigotry message, was really heavy-handed and there was no subtlety to it. And I know that it's a book for children, but you can have subtlety with children. I mean, the book I just mentioned previously, Beyond the Bright Sea, is subtle in its messaging, but I think it's clear. It would be clear even to a child. And this I just found was so like, just kind of like ham-handed. I don't know. I didn't enjoy the writing. Um, the protagonist is the tree, but there's these other characters, this boy and a girl, and it seems that the girl is and her family are the target of this word that's been carved onto the tree. The word is leave. I can just say it. Someone writes leave in capitals on the tree, like carves it into the tree. And I kind of feel like this boy and girl, so this girl and then the boy, her neighbor, I feel like they were meant to be part of the story, but they were so, it wasn't even secondary. They were tertiary, like they weren't, they were so outside of the story. And I feel like they were supposed to be like high schoolers, but the book is written really super simplistic language. I feel like this would be written for like an 8-year-old maybe, but the boy and the girl are like, it seems to be high schoolers. Their ages I don't think are ever really given. But I just felt the language didn't match like the characters. I found the language, I felt like it talked down to kids, which kind of aggravated me. Anyway, I really did not like this book, and I know it's well loved, so please don't hate me, but it was just not for me. So the next book I read was The Inquisitor's Tale by Adam Gidwitz, and it follows 3 children during medieval times. I think it was set in the 1250s or something like that. These 3 children are being hunted by the King of France and his army, his knights. The 3 main characters are this peasant girl who escapes her village because she fears she's going to be burned as a witch. So she has these seizures and sees visions that come true. And but some people are saying that this is like divine influence. So there's a bit of like Joan of Arc element there. Then there's a Jewish boy who has fled his town because Christian boys have burned it down, and he doesn't know if his parents have survived. And then the third character is a black boy who was raised by monks, and so he's like very religious. So you have like accused witch, basically, Jewish boy, and then very Christian monk in training. So it's about like them with all of their different worldviews, basically, having to work together. And I thought like there were some good elements of this book. It wasn't bad. It was just kind of okay for me. I found it. I didn't find you really engaged with the characters. Like it was very much like, I feel like the author was telling a story versus evoking emotion. So yeah, that was about a 3-star read for me. So the next book I read was The Sleeper and the Spindle by Neil Gaiman, illustrated by Chris Riddell. So this I enjoyed. I had like one little problem with it. This is essentially a retelling of Sleeping Beauty, but Snow White is also part of the story. They are never named in this book. It's very much left ambiguous, but essentially there's this girl who's been asleep in this castle for like 80 years, 70 years, something like that. But the sleeping that her kingdom, her castle has been cursed with is spreading. So all the outer villages are getting basically infected by the sleeping, and the sleeping is spreading. So this neighboring queen is going to go and try to wake this girl because then the spell will be broken. I think the illustrations really elevated this story. They are just beautiful. I don't want to say too much because Neil Gaiman really does like twist your expectations into how the story plays out. The one little thing that bothered me was the way this was marketed, and like when you see posts about it, like when they were promoting this book, if you dig up some of those old things, they heavily featured this illustration, which I'll show now, which is the presumably Snow White character, the queen, finding the girl in the castle and kissing her to wake her up. And I think a lot of people thought this was going to be like a queer retelling. That's certainly what I had expected, and it's not. This is just, okay, here I am. She has to get woken up. How do we wake up people from sleeping curses? You kiss them. So it was very kind of like an offhanded thing, and it wasn't a queer retelling of this, which really disappointed me. So that's the only reason I didn't enjoy this as much as I would have. But it did get elevated by the illustrations, like I said, and also there's a big twist in terms of like when Sleeping Beauty wakes up, what happens is not what you expect to happen. And that part I really enjoyed. So this was like a 4-star. If it had really kind of like leaned into the whole like female kiss and made this a bit more of a queer story, I think it would have been a 5-star. Maybe that's unfair because that was just my own assumption about the book, but it was really heavily marketed with that one picture, so I think maybe that was a little disingenuous. So just that little tiny asterisk, but besides that, I thought this was really good. So the next book I read was The Jumbies by Tracy Baptiste, and this is based on Caribbean folklore about these creatures called Jumbies, which live in the forests of these island nations. And it follows a girl called Coraline, and I really liked her as a character. I thought she was a great central character. She's very skeptical, which I liked, although it turns out the Jumbies are real, so I guess she was wrong. But I like that she's skeptical and she's thinking things through. She's very brave and just, let's just get this done. There's a problem. These Jumbies are coming out of the forest and we have to stop them, and here's what we're going to do, and takes matters into her own hands. I just loved the main character. I also liked all of the secondary characters. So she teams up with these orphan brothers who live on the street, and this other girl who is very kind of like mama's girl, like hides behind her mama's clothing and is very shy and cowardly. And it's how they all band together and play their own parts in trying to stop the Jumbies from taking over the island. So this was a great read. I don't know if this author has any other books, but if she does, I would probably pick them up. So the next book I read was actually the group read for the readathon, and it was The Book of Boy by Catherine Gilbert Murdoch. This is also set in medieval times. This I enjoyed way more than The Inquisitor's Tale, however. So it is about a boy who is nameless. He's just called Boy, and he works as a goat herd on this manor, and this pilgrim comes along and basically brings this boy on this quest. He needs someone to help him find the relics of St. Peter. The pilgrim wants to collect these 7 relics of St. Peter and bring them back to St. Peter's tomb for his own reasons. And Boy wants to do it because, I haven't mentioned yet, so Boy has a hump. They call him Hunchback sometimes. He's been ridiculed. Stones have been thrown at them. He calls himself internally sometimes Monster. He doesn't want people to look at him anymore and call him Monster. He just wants to be a boy. So he goes with the pilgrim because he wants to help him collect these relics so that when he returns them to the tomb of St. Peter, he can pray to become a real boy and not be a monster anymore. I just thought this was I think I gave it about a 4-star probably. It was just really engaging. It was very adventurous, this like epic quest to get these things. I like how the relationship between the pilgrim and Boy changes over time and how they get to know each other. It really kind of tugged at my heartstrings towards the end as well. So that was a great group pick. So the last two books on my list were rereads. So the first one was Rover Random by J.R.R. Tolkien, and I read this a very long time ago. And it didn't really live up to what I remember. I remember it being better than it was. It was fine. It was kind of like a 3-star read for me. So it was definitely had fun little elements, very, very cute, but what it was lacking for me was kind of like an overarching like quest or goal essentially. So this follows a little dog called Rover who one day bites the trousers of a wizard, and the wizard gets angry and turns him into a toy dog and basically transports him to a toy shop. And it's about him trying to get back to this wizard to apologize and beg forgiveness so that the wizard would turn him back into a real dog. It had some fun little elements. So the dog ends up on the moon and he spends time there with the man on the moon and his dog and having adventures there. And then he ends up in at the bottom of the sea with the mermaids and the king of the sea, and he has adventures there. There was a lot of going from place to place and having those little adventures, but there wasn't like an overarching like you know, there should have been, because he was trying to find this wizard, but he really wasn't really. He would just end up somewhere and just stay there for a few weeks or months, and then he'd go somewhere else. He didn't really seem to remember that he had a goal in mind. So the last book that I read was another reread, and it was Coraline by Neil Gaiman. This is one of my favorite middle grade / children's books. It is about a girl called Coraline who moves into this house with her parents. So as she's exploring the house, she finds this secret passageway to another world where she meets her other mother who wants to love and take care of Coraline, but in order to stay with the other mother wants to sew buttons onto Coraline's eyes so that she can stay there with her forever. The other mother also has like button eyes. It's really creepy. It's basically a children's horror novel. I read it a number of years ago. This time I decided to listen to it on audiobook, which was also great. Neil Gaiman narrates it himself, and he does an absolutely excellent job. I didn't realize what a great narrator he is, but it's essentially just this creepy tale of this girl who some sort of weird creature calling herself the other mother is trying to trick her into staying to this other world, and things are not what they seem. Like everything seems perfect at first, but you slowly realize like this is some sort of creature from someone's nightmare who is trying to trick Coraline into staying there. And it's about Coraline's deviousness and bravery in figuring out how to get out of this situation and how to get back to her world and foil the other mother. We'll probably read again in the future. It's one of my favorites. So those are all the books I read for middle grade March. It was such a fun readathon, and if you are someone who is having to stay home a lot right now and you're not sure what to grab from your shelves, middle grade, at least for me, are really comforting reads. So if you have some handy, pick one up, read a middle grade today. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.